I want to talk about drafting and revision and the sort of the different stages that a piece goes through. I'm at a point in a piece of piano music that I've been working on where I'm shifting gears, and it occurs to me that it might be a little bit interesting to talk through this inflection point because as I mature as a writer, this is an inflection point that I recognize more and more is important. It's probably means that I'm about 80% of the way through the piece, like in terms of writing it, with about 20% of the work remaining left to do. But this 20% is it's tough. So I'm going to talk about that inflection point, but I want to start off with talking about this book, The Art of Revision, by Peter Ho Davis. In fact, this whole series, the Art of series, is really great. They are all written by poets and authors in a very connected, personal way. And they all have a very specific area of focus. Like this is the Art of Revision. I'm going to reach over here because I have the whole set. I bought the whole set at the start of the year, and maybe a dozen of them. The Art of History, the Art of Subtext. You know, some of these, the Art of the Poetic Line, the Art of Syntax, some of them are very specific grammar texts. Some of them are more abstract, more general. This one here, the Art of Time in Fiction, the Art of Daring, the Art of Recklessness. And I'm working my way through these, and they're all wonderful. One of the first I read was by Mark Doty, a poet that I didn't know about. He wrote one called The Art of Description, chock full of wonderful poetry that I hadn't known about, and ways to think about how a poet uses language to evoke, not just to describe, but to create the experience of. And I loved it so much that I looked to see what else Mark Doty had written. And he's written an extraordinary book about Walt Whitman that I highly recommend. It's over on my shelf there. I can't remember what it's called. Something like Other Leaves of Grass or something like that. But it's a memoir about, I can't even describe it. It's a wonderful book. Anyway, this book about revision really resonated with how I think about revision. And how I think about revision is absolutely shaped by George Saunders and this book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is, in one sense, a series of essays about specific short stories, Russian short stories. Then how to read a short story, but then how to think about writing. What I learned from George was the idea of ideas. Write something and then question what you just wrote, like literally enter into dialogue with it. He's talking about stories, so he would say, and he would write, a man is sitting with a microphone looking. And then maybe tomorrow you come back and say something very small, like, oh, his legs are crossed. What does that indicate about what he's doing? He's looking out a window, in this case, and then another, what's he looking at out the window? The next day you might realize those two pieces don't really go together. So they're separated, but maybe this second part requires a little bit of invention. And then you end up with all of this material that is connected in ever-increasing levels of complexity, nuance, detail, until you have your story. And at no point does it require like knowing how the story is going to end. And this was important for me to learn, and not just to intellectually learn, but to really get into my heart that it's okay when I start a piece of music that it never ends up the way I wanted it to. But my compositions have become much better in the last couple of years because I now approach it as, here's an idea. What's the context that that idea really demands? And so I write. Well, let me come back to how I write because I don't want to forget to read that. I didn't want to. George Saunders, I've talked a lot about, but here I want to read the quote from The Art of Revision. It's a bit long, but I'm going to read the whole thing. As I've suggested, contrary to workshop rules of engagement, we don't all know what we intend when we set out a first draft. Let me stress, this is not some spurious binary between having an intention and not having one. Right? Because, of course, we have an intention to write a piece of music. There's some impulse, right? Having an intention and not having one. Not knowing what we intend isn't the same as having no intention. We do often have some idea, some sense. Call it a hypothesis, as I do. Call it a hunch, an inkling, what you will. But our writing often reveals to us the limits of that idea, the fuzziness of it. I think of the first idea of a piece of music or an essay, I think in very kinesthetic terms, as a gesture, which could have a bit of a visual component to it, but it could also just be like a clenching of a muscle. And it means something, but I don't know what it means. It might articulate itself on the piano to some very broad ideas like high versus low, close versus far, loud versus soft. But it's fuzzy. It's a gesture. It's an inkling. Okay, then he goes on to say, at which point, of course, we're often tempted to give up. We lose faith in the shining idea that God has started when we discover its flaws. Or for many years, I either didn't write or I wrote shit because I doubled down on those flaws, thinking that the ideas and the sketches that I'd started with, that it was a failure not to follow through with whatever was on those. I'd argue on the contrary, says Peter, that we need to persevere, that the discovery we've made that our idea isn't as sharp as we hoped doesn't mean the idea is no good. Rather, it suggests it's more complex, more, not less worthy of further exploration. And that seems to me to be exactly the purpose of revision, not the perfection of the expression of some already known idea or subject, but the investigation and extrapolation of it toward a deeper understanding. So I hope you find that refreshing and inspirational. I think we get caught in the idea that a good composer knows what the piece is going to do from the moment that we start down. I don't know why we have that, except maybe it's reverse engineered from the expectation that we can analyze a piece of music, a piece by Mozart or Beethoven, and come up with a structure that suggests everything that happens later in the piece was implied by something that began earlier. That's for this organic development of thematic or structural material. And so we assume that the piece began with that full understanding. And I think, I'm sure that there's an element of that, but like I said, I've become certainly a much happier composer. Not more successful, let's be clear on that. 6 of you who listen to my videos know what I do, but it's, So here's how I write. I write at the keyboard, and some idea will come up, and I will write it down on paper like this. And I have hundreds of pieces of paper lined around like this. These are my ideas, right? And I will return to these, and I've been looking for this one. I'm writing a set of short pieces. I'm going to keep that. I will return to these, and I will extend them, because something that started like actually needs to be for example, all of a sudden it's an entirely different idea. But it didn't come out that way. It just came out as the idea of arpeggio of a series of harmonies in fives. So at a certain point, I have enough of this that I start to think structurally. I start to think I'm by nature an episodic composer rather than a throughly composed organic composer. Not to say that there isn't an element of variation and shared, like the development of material, but I'm very comfortable starting with episodic material. But it has to be connected, or it has to be placed next to the right thing. So I'll start to take some of these ideas and write them out as a piece. But at a point quite soon after that, I go into Sibelius and I start to transcribe the music from this into Sibelius. And that's because there's a great discipline in actually taking shitty notes and turning it into something that may still be the same shitty notes, but has a bit of rigor to it. It has a bit more maturity to it because now it's in the scoring software. And what I do then for a long time is I load up the piece onto a PDF and open it in Fourscore, and then I mark up Fourscore like that, and then I will take it back and I will go through and rewrite out in paper the indications in Fourscore, because quite often that those red marks require a page to figure out. And then I'll put it into Sibelius and back into PDF. And the advantage of it being in PDF is that I can start to shift my gears a little bit and play it at the piano. Again, it's still just shitty notes, but my mind shifts a little bit when I'm looking at something as a score, as a pianist. So for many, many months, all that's happening is I recognize that this one gesture really was incomplete and needed to be 3 times as long, or it needed to be repeated, or it needed to be deleted, or it needed to be moved against something different. All of those big block, copy, paste, excise, delete, redo, rewrite, reformat, goes on forever. But where I'm at with this piece now, and the inflection point, is that I don't expect to make any big structural changes anymore. Now, like those red marks that I just showed you, that's because I was lazy and wrote out things as tremolos, when what I really meant was a particular rhythmic pattern that I'd used in some other similar material earlier in the piece. And so now I'm going to clean that up. There's going to be hundreds of edits around around what does it mean to make the score playable. And that's still a compositional thing, right? It isn't just layout. It really is now trying to just take the ideas that I'm pretty confident now belong where they are. But the physical act of playing reveals gaps in, often in things like chord resolutions or voice leading. where up until this point, because it's been sort of, it hasn't been played through, it's been a lot of thinking and capturing initial ideas. The details of voice leading, that's a good example, right? Well, in this piece, this is an interesting piece because there's a very there's a lot of octaves. Octaves are beautiful and wonderful, but they need to be treated with a bit of respect. And I don't want octaves to just show up, right? They need to be there because particularly with the kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, polytonal. It's not really polytonal. It's not atonal. Non-functional chords that I use. An octave really stands out. And that can be very powerful. But I can't just let it happen. But when I talk about ideas, that came early. In fact, that's what started the piece. So I said I write episodically, but most of what you're going to hear in the piece derives from that juxtaposition of a non-functional chordal bit and octaves. It's that simple. The piece is quite long. It's probably going to be about 15 to 20 minutes long. I'm thinking of it as this is going to sound very audacious, but as a partner piece for Schumann's Kreisleriana. I could totally see a concert playing this, which is called Rotating Desirous Only of You, and Kreisleriana. So the inflection point is that now I'm going through, and where I have sections like this, which is very kinetic, rhythmic music across kind of a narrow set of those non-functional harmonies. I need to play it, and I need to shape it, because in that section in particular, there are some dynamics that are absolutely essential. I am lazy with dynamics and articulations. But I've learned that some of them are absolutely necessary to shape the piece. It's a compositional decision that it's, I've been lazy with it, but it will highlight where there may still be some music that needs to be written, because maybe I'm expecting something to pop and it really needs it needs an extra something. So I'll go through all of that. But again, this section is going to be probably unchanged in its broad outlines. And so now I can start thinking also about the fun part of scoring, which is, here's Kreisleriana. I have this wonderful Courtauld edition. But the sectionality of this piece is quite beautiful. I don't need to have pages of notes about how to play it. This is a study score. Courtauld has given suggestions on how to practice. I am going to spend next year working on this piece, and I may do a series of videos working diligently through Courtaulds' suggestions. But in my mind, I want this piece that I'm writing to look something like that, just from a notational perspective. Where that's a bit of a shift, actually. I've liked the. This is Salabert. Yeah. No, it's not really a shift. It's just it's Schumann instead of Ravel. A lot of my music looks like Ravel. So that's where I'm at. At some point, I will print this out. Right? That's interesting. I've not at any point yet printed the whole thing and marked it up. That's sort of one of the last things that I'll do, and that really is then imagining that I'm a pianist, looking at a score, and then is the spacing right? This is maybe what we normally mean by scoring. Are all my accidentals clear? Do I need to provide any additional commentary on how it should be played? I got a copy of Ellie Goulding's book Behind Bars. It's always called, a Beyond Bars. Don't know where I've put it. Again, as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate the task of scoring. I mean, I have some pieces I wrote, within the last 5 years. So since I started writing again, and the score is just for shit because I figured I'm just going to play it, and I don't have time to make it look nice. But I've really started to appreciate just the pleasure of music scoring. All right. So back to the inflection point. I don't expect to be writing out many new pages of hand script to correct this. I expect that from here on, most of my corrections will be marked up on this score. There'll be some that need more than that. That now I'm looking to make it playable, and the act of making it playable is revision and composition. So, thank you for listening. And if you found this interesting, drop a comment or an email with any questions, suggestions. This cycle between Sibelius to fourscore to manuscript and back and around, I find very, very useful. What do you think? Do you use the iPad? I think the iPad with the pencil is fantastic. It doesn't replace proper pencil with proper paper, but it certainly saves me printing out a score 100 times to only just mark it up. So maybe that's the only thing I really like about it. Anyway, I'll let you go. Thank you.